Number 2, does anyone at the table have introductions?
Good morning, Madam Chair. I do have a couple introductions of speakers that are coming up here shortly this morning. First, for agenda item number 13, the Smart Scale Up process update. I want to introduce Brooke Jackson. She's a Smart Scale Program Manager out of the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment. Also, item number 15, the agenda item on air terminal interchange update. We have Sambo Seka, who's the VDOT Hampton Roads District Major Project Design Manager. So they'll both be presenting this morning. Just wanted to introduce them.
Great, and we look forward to hearing those presentations. They don't require any action, so we'll definitely be able to hit those items. Were there any other introductions at the table? Moving on to, well, skipping item number 3 and moving on to item number 4 would be public comment period for anyone at the meeting that would like to speak. We would ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes per individual. Is there anyone present at the meeting that would like to speak? Seeing none, we note item 5, submitted public comments. There are no submitted public comments in your agenda package this month. Item number 6 would be updates from our state and federal agencies and military partners. So we'll start with VDOT.
Yes, Madam Chair, I do have a couple updates this morning. First, some training opportunities that are coming up. Sonia's group will be hosting an urban quarterly forum, and it'll be on cost estimating workbook on October 25th. So she'll send out some additional information on that item. Also, I do want to mention that Central Office Local Assistance Division will be hosting a locally administered project qualification program in-person class. So that'll be coming up October 27th, all day in person in Petersburg area. The exact location hasn't been determined yet. But as you all are aware, to administer a locally administered project, you have to have a full-time staff member that has gone through this qualification program, and it does require requalification every 3 years. So this is October 27th for an in-person training. I'm sure there will be others. I just wanted to share this opportunity. I have some links that I'll include in the agenda meeting minutes. Couple reminders on some programs that we have that are closing here soon. The Virginia Highway Safety Improvement Program, HSIP applications are due at 5 p.m. in the Smart Portal on October 31st. So I know a lot of localities have reached out to VDOT, and VDOT's been meeting, traffic engineering has been meeting with your staffs, kind of going through possible applications. So please don't miss that deadline. The other item is, of course, the Transportation Alternatives Program. That application period closed on October 2nd. For the Revenue Sharing Program, there were some hiccups in the Smart Portal, so that was extended to this Friday, October 6th, 5 p.m. So if you have any questions or concerns or issues with Smart Portal, please feel free to reach out to Sonia and our team. The other program is the State of Good Repair Local Paving Program. Applications for that program open on October 10th in the Smart Portal and close at 5 p.m. on December 8th. So again, please be sure to submit that. And as with the last year's program, it is assumed to be federal unless we get an exception. We did receive an exception for the federal process for the previous year program. I'm not sure if we'll receive it for this one, but we will apply and try. So keep that in mind as you're submitting your applications. And then finally, the Ready, Set, Go program. This is a new program. We're on our second round. Application period is open through November 17th. This is for any locality with a population under 200,000 to receive assistance from VDOT on applications for the TA program. So again, I'll send additional information out as part of the meeting minutes on that. But that's all I had, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I just wanted to mention too, is it true that with the qualifications program, even though it's a full day training in Petersburg, there's also pre-modules that have to be done prior to you actually showing up to the in-person class?
Yes, Madam Chair. There's some prerequisite classes that have to be held, that have to be taken, courses online. I think there's maybe 8 or 9 of them that have to be taken prior to attending the in-person training class. So that'll be in what I send out. I'll include that in there.
Okay, and then I also received an email about a switch in platforms regarding the requalification. So has the requalification been, if my understanding is correct, it's been extended to the end of the year?
That's my understanding, yes, Madam Chair.
I guess if anybody has any questions, they can contact you or Sonia about that.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I believe DRPT is not here today. Federal Highways is not here today. And the port is not with us today. Do we have any military liaisons with us today? So our comments and updates are complete. Moving on to nominating of the subcommittee for appointments. We do have a TTAC nominating subcommittee for nominating the vice chair and chairman, which will be an action that we take coming up at the January meeting. Rather looking forward to that myself. Our chair has consistently been Mr. Robert Lewis from Suffolk over the last couple of cycles, but we do have a couple of vacancies on that committee. One of them is our agency position that we need to look to fill if anyone has any recommendations or would like to volunteer. And we do have a locality vacancy as well. Based on our previous rotations, we might recommend someone from the peninsula. If you haven't reviewed the agenda, I can certainly look. Currently, we have Robert Lewis from Suffolk, Troy Eisenberg from Chesapeake, Angela Rico from Newport News, David Jarman from Virginia Beach, and Tim Cross from York County. So we'll reach out and confirm someone with James City County. And then as far as our agency representative. I guess we'll go ahead and reach out after the meeting by email. And
Madam Chair, I'd like to volunteer one of the agencies that's not here. No, I'm kidding. If nobody else offers me, I would be glad to fill in that role.
we'll go ahead and take a look at the last handful of people that filled that position and then reach out by email to try to get that filled before the next meeting.
Madam Chair, I believe we had previously had both WADA and HRT serve on that committee, and I don't remember anybody prior to that. So we have had those representatives.
Okay. So that would either be VDOT or somebody who's not here. So we'll go ahead and reach out by email to try to get that confirmed before the next meeting. We're going to skip over item number 8, approval of consent items.
Madam Chair, before we leave item number 7, even though we don't have a complete committee, and I do hear some possible volunteers around, right after the meeting this morning, I'd like to just grab the committee over here in the corner for about 2 minutes to just get us started thinking. Thank you, ma'am.
We'll need to skip over item 9 and 10 and 11, and that brings us to item 12, which is an update on the Federal Metropolitan Planning Funds. We'll go ahead with that presentation.
Thank you and good morning. If people are looking up here at the podium and saying his hair looks grayer than I remember last, this subject is the reason why. Wanted to spend a few minutes today talking about what we call PL funding, the federal planning funding, which is allocated to metropolitan regions to carry out the comprehensive, cooperative, and continuing 3C transportation process defined in federal law since 1962. Like most federal funds, these are 80% dollars that come to the Commonwealth of Virginia, end up being matched 10% state, 10% local. And VDOT receives Virginia's PL allocation and distributes to the designated metropolitan planning organizations across the Commonwealth by formula. So looking at where funding stands in the current fiscal year, FY24, Virginia received 10.127 million in federal with match that equates to 12.7, and all the numbers you see for the remainder of the presentation will show match dollars for distribution to the state's 15 MPOs. The bipartisan infrastructure law has been very beneficial for many programs, and PL funding has benefited as well. We've seen growth in that program under the code of about 2% annually, and that's projected to continue through 2026. Beyond that, it'll be the next bill to see what happens. Looking specifically within this building, the PL allocation to the HRTPO for FY26 you see was 3.26 million. PL funds have a characteristic that once they're allocated to an agency, they are not recaptured. So surplus funds have the opportunity to either be deobligated in the current year and immediately rolled into the next fiscal year, or at the option have the remaining funds, unspent funds at the end of a fiscal year come back 100% after a lapse of a year. So if you look at the FY24 budget for the TPO, besides the 3.264 in allocation of this year, we also have a carryover balance from FY22 of about 1.34 million. And that those two figures together represent about 80% of our operating budget of 5.8 million. This is bone marrow for us. So we pay very close attention to PL funding allocations and processes. Currently, the allocation formula in Virginia breaks down into three parts. There's an air quality factor, which is very minor. Only Northern Virginia is receiving funding based upon their air quality status at $10,000 annually. So that's a very small factor. Then you have a equal base allocation of 50,000 across all agencies, and that's proportionally adjusted to multi-state agencies. If 40% of population is Virginia and 60% is in another state, then the base allocation is adjusted accordingly. And then you have Richmond and Tri-Cities, which are separate MPOs, but the same metropolitan urban area. So they currently only split the 50,000, and they've asked that each agency be eligible for the base allocation. The majority of the funding goes through a population distribution based upon a region's share of statewide urban population. And VDOT, within the past several months, has opened a consultation process to now integrate the 2020 census information into the funding formula. Hard to see all these numbers, but this shows the population changes between the 2010 and 2020 census. And even though the Hampton Roads region grew by about 1.7% under the census definition of the urban area, our share of the urban population, and that's the line in the green I'm calling attention to, fell from 26.9% of the statewide urban area population to 25.2%. And so it's that share of urban area population which is used in the PL funding distribution. As noted under the header on the table, though, if you remember Dale Stiff several months ago talking about how the census area changed and created Suffolk as its own independent urban area rather than connected. So the 42,000 plus urban population of Suffolk is no longer included in the Hampton Roads total because of the demographer change in approach between 2010 and 2020. And the other thing to note in that final column on the right, 7 of the 14 regions saw their share of the statewide urban population decline between 2010 and 2020. And I just ask you to keep that figure of half in your mind as we go forward. So there are several issues as VDOT began this consultation process that came forward. You have, not to harp on it, the change in 2010 to 2020, where in my terminology, the census called this region potato in 2010, but now we're 2020 being called potato with a new urban area. If you might have noticed in the prior table, the New River, which is Blacksburg area, had a similar fate where the independent city of Radford was cut off and created as an independent area away from the metropolitan region, and they're experiencing the same reduction that impacts this area like Suffolk. So you have this demographer change that is impacting potentially how funds are distributed. Besides that, there's been a request to increase base funding amounts. The smaller MPOs, the base funding is much more important to them. If you think 50,000 isn't even one staff person to do all the work and requirements of the federal process. And so an increased base amount would really help them with the multifaceted requirements, but the more money you take off the top in a base funding allocation across the agencies limits then the amount remaining to go through the formula distribution, which favors the larger, of course, agencies. And then I had mentioned earlier that Richmond and Tri-Cities, rather than splitting a single base amount, are now requesting a base funding of each. The large MPOs, such as Hampton Roads, are also transportation management agencies with additional requirements beyond just those of the 3C process. And so funding those efforts led by Keith Nichols' team primarily is an important effort, but requires considerable resources at different times. There's been a request potentially to smooth out some of these changes because of what's going on, of phasing in the 2020 census over multiple years. And then what this whole process has shown is PL funding alone sufficient to keep going forward? And should additional state support for urban transportation planning in Virginia be considered? Even at modest amounts could have a tremendous benefit. So the thing that scares us, this table just shows the 2024 with an existing, and again, these will all be distributed after the meeting. I wouldn't ask you to read this whole this chart, but then redoing 2024 existing with the 2020 census numbers. If you leave it just at the $50,000 base, Hampton Roads gets that 6% cut of which its share of urban population you saw in the population total. But if you start increasing base allocation to either 75,000, the middle section, or even 100,000, the far right, you see those cuts approach almost 375,000 or more than 11%. And those kinds of numbers get scary fast. The Virginia Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations started looking at this and came up with a proposal that seek to blend kind of the competing interests. And shown in this table is a two-phased recommendation, increasing the base amount to 75,000 per agency, giving Petersburg and Richmond each own allocation, but then phasing in the census, 2020 census over 2 years so that the 2020 numbers wouldn't become fully effective until FY 2027. During this time, PL funding grows from its current 12.7 to more than 13 million. And so by phasing in and letting the program grow, even with the increased base amount, it levels out and steadies the impact and swings to the agency, and was viewed as a compromise type approach. But if you look at the far right column, you see two numbers in red, and that's the New River Valley, which is Blacksburg, and the issue they have with Radford and Hampton Roads with the issue with Suffolk. And so this obviously better than just the full, just immediate, and provides a little bit more stable planning going forward, but still was unsatisfactory to at least a few of us as we looked at this. So where do we stand? The VAMPO board late last month by a majority vote, 12-2. You can guess who the two were. Recommended implementation of the 2-year phase plan together with an increased balance base allocation of 75,000. Later this month, VDOT will recommend to Federal Highway its proposed adjustment to the Virginia funding formula for PL funding. And then once this new funding structure has been approved, it will have additional implications going forward that the allocation of Federal Transit Administration Section 5303 funds will have to reflect what the new formula is ultimately agreed upon. So there will be additional impacts and changes once that process is completed. So we're not sure exactly when VDOT will make its recommendation. This has been a consultation process. It's ultimately VDOT's decision as to what to go forward. We've tried to make our case as strongly as possible that no matter what the demographers and the Federal Register of December 29th, 2022 says, City of Suffolk is one of the 8th largest city in the Commonwealth. It has 2 of the most important freight corridors in Virginia. There are hundreds of billions of dollars of transportation projects that are going to be planned and built across that city, and it is clearly part of this region, a full participant in this process, and not counting its urban population as defined by the census in our population, we find just fundamentally unsatisfactory. And ultimately, how that will be resolved, we'll see. And with that, we'll take questions.
Before we have questions, did VDOT or the City of Suffolk have any comments on the process, since you're both significant players in the discussion?
Madam Chair, I will say per meeting yesterday, I know VDOT's evaluating what VAMPO sent in to see if that's amenable. Also, VDOT's reached out to Federal Highway to see if they are amenable to phasing in, allowing us to phase in the implementation of this. So I think conversations have been had that it sounds like that might be favorable, but I know VDOT's trying to get to a decision as quick as possible and taking in all consideration of what Hampton Roads has provided as well as what Blacksburg's provided. But I don't know of any, as of right now, a decision has not been made, but I know there's a meeting even as of tomorrow. There's another meeting to try to get this pushed through as quick as possible into Federal Highway for approval.
And I assume that's happening at the central office level.
Yes, it is.
Were there any questions? Thank you. Item 13 is a presentation from VDOT on an overview and status update of the Smart Scale process.
Hello, good morning. I'm Brooke Jackson. I am the Smart Scale Program Manager with the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment. It was Chad Tucker before me, rounds 1 through 3.5. I started taking over in round 4, and round 5 was my first official round as the Smart Scale Program Manager. So I will say before we get into this, the Smart Scale process review, this isn't our first time at this. Every round we do take a good amount of time to look at the data, see how things are shaking out, and work through process updates, do surveys, see how we need to make improvements on customer service, whether through our smart portal, through our technical guides, through actually updating methodologies, looking at the latest and greatest methodologies. But this is our first really big look at a wider ranging survey and a wider ranging in-depth independent review. We've had a consultant help us look at some of the data for the past 5 rounds. Before I get into everything, I do like to give a quick snapshot of smart scale in general, just because not everybody is in the smart scale world like we are every day. Smart scale removes the political element of project selection in the Commonwealth and focuses on projects that bring the best value. HB2 of 2014 General Assembly, also known as Smart Scale now, it required the implementation of a formal prioritization process by June of 2016. And that is what it is. It's a prioritization process. It is a tool that is used by the CTB to make a decision of what to put into the 6-year improvement plan. Smart Scale is one piece of a greater construction program where only 40% of the total construction program 30, I think it's 30% then goes to state of good repair, 20% goes to IOEP, 10% to HSIP. So we are just one piece of the puzzle. We are one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle, though, being for the capital improvement. We are not a maintenance program. Applicants in Smart Scale are MPOs, PDCs, transit agencies, and localities. The CTB has 2 slots for applications. They don't always use those 2 slots, but we have seen in the past rounds they have used the last slot. In round 5, they used 2 slots for their application, but that is a critical thing. IOEP is different. IOEP, the Interstate Operations and Enhancement Program, does not have applicants that are not VDOT. VDOT is prioritizing for the interstate in that case. So this is kind of unique to Smart Scale. We're a multimodal program for capital improvement projects. We score the projects together depending, it doesn't matter what kind of mode the project is. It could be a bike, ped, transit, highway. All of the projects are scored together. And that is unique to Virginia. Different states do it differently and make different modes be in different programs. So that is a very special part of the process. According to law, we need to fully fund projects, and this makes Smart Scale typically the last dollars that go on a project. So if you'll have to visit other programs first, revenue sharing, TA programs, and typically are funding first seed in money, and then you get your last dollars from the Smart Scale process. The Commonwealth does provide applicant support. I know we have our STARS program, we have our pipeline programs. I mean, beyond that, typically a lot of staff help is helping with application development. I'm sure you work with Eric Stringfield or Jerry Pauly here in the office are in the room right now, working through application development. So the state is providing that support, even though they aren't the applicants themselves. There is a really tight relationship to get these applications turned into projects and actually developed. And again, like I said, it's a decision tool. Once we release results on the odd years in January, by May, you're working with your CTB member to determine if the projects that are recommended for funding through our staff scenario are the right fit for you. And typically there is a lot of work that's done within those 5 months to determine if those are the right projects. And the Smart Scale process has allocated $6.3 billion over 5 rounds, supporting a total portfolio of over $14.5 billion, leveraging $8.2 billion in local and regional funds. And we do know that there's a certain really big project in this region that takes a lot of that credit. Okay, so to talk about the process review itself, we started this process, so like I said, in January of 2023, we came out with the round 5 staff recommended results. And so we were working in tandem with finishing out round 5 and kicking off this bigger, greater process review. In January, after we did the results, we sent out a survey to 1,300 stakeholders. I'm sure plenty in the room have taken that survey. We had over 400 respondents to the survey, asking about general feedback of how the program's working for you. There was some more targeted questions, but there was a lot of open-ended room for the survey. And in February, we kicked off with the CTB what our plan was for this process review. While the survey was still open, while we were doing workshops with our internal staff, with our consultants, getting feedback from people and data collecting was happening in that February time period. In April, our consultant that was working with us, ATCS, went to the CTB for a presentation on the results of the survey. If you haven't seen that, I would highly recommend going to the CTB website and checking out that presentation because it got into the weeds of the results of the survey. And that was the core seed of where we started with this whole review is those results. So if you're looking for more information, that's a good place to start. Then in May, I came to the board with our first set of recommendations, and we have been coming monthly ever since. So we have had 7 briefings to the board. And as you can see, we're pretty far along on the timeline. We are in October right now, so we'll have one more briefing to the board with our final recommendations. And we are currently in the public comment period. So there will still be time before there is action with policy adoption. Hopefully, it says adoption, but it really should say action on there. There's no guarantee that they're going to adopt the changes that we recommend, but we'll have action in December. So this slide is more to reiterate how we've done the process throughout. The review has been guided by the survey responses and an independent statistical analysis used to draw conclusions on perceptions. Solutions to the issues were developed with consistent stakeholder feedback. So I highlighted the process here just to kind of show you how important stakeholder involvement has been throughout. Starting with the survey response, we had our consultant ATCS do their own independent review on the 5 rounds of smart scale data, do a statistical analysis. And what they're looking into is whether or not the perceptions that came out of the survey had founded data behind it and validating if there really truly was issues that were called out from the survey and if the data supports some of the perceptions. They provided the conclusions on the perceptions of what issues we needed to address and come up with solutions for. And our teams within OIP, DRPT, and BDOT develop potential solutions to validated issues. All the while, we are meeting with our technical advisory committee 2 times a month, and we also had some outside participants in our TAC, VML, VACO, and VTA participated on our TAC on our twice monthly meeting. So we are giving them updates on things we're considering, trying to get feedback, and giving public comment that we receive, we'd report out to the TAC so that they could adjust on what their recommendations were as well. We also were meeting monthly with the executive committees, including the secretary, commissioner, and director of DRPT. So they also had a very big hand in helping develop the recommendations. And then, of course, we were presenting monthly to the CTB. So this has been a very long road, a lot of coordination, and we are getting public comment constantly throughout this process. And I do take the time to make sure that all of those stakeholders are apprised of what public comment is as we're going through. Not to mention briefing CTB members also inside individual meetings. We're trying to keep them up to speed. I will say in the original base survey response, we met with CTB members individually, one-on-one, to get all of their perceptions and what they're feeling and get that documented along with reaching out toward the 1,300 stakeholders. Okay, so I will disclaimer, I'm going to go through boiling down what the key recommendations are, and this is actually a reiteration of the September meeting. Yes, we're in October again. So if you want more detail, I would go back to the September meeting. I'm going to go through this, and every month the CTB meetings have way more detail. The meetings have been lasting about, while I'm up there, probably 2 hours every time. So there is plenty of information to get more detail. And of course, I'll take questions after this as well. But key findings, after reviewing the comments and outcomes of 5 rounds of Smart Scale, a few key issues stood out. Leverage projects of 30 million funding or more, 30 million have a funding advantage. And that is, of course, how it was designed. We have designed Smart Scale to encourage leveraging, to encourage that local commitment, to encourage support on those projects. And that is how our Smart Scale score is set up. We have our benefits divided by our cost, and it's the leverage cost. It's the cost minus your leverage. So that is intentional. And we spent some time talking about this in June, but truly it is what CTB policy encourages. I know that this deeply connects with the urban and rural sentiment as well on who can leverage and who cannot, but we also will cover a little bit of that urban and rural bias as well. Application quality needs to improve. Over 50% of round 5 applications were determined to be not ready at full application submission. And being honest here, that was in October after we had spent a lot of time digging into things. This wasn't August 1st. In October, we had an oh no moment and realized there was still 50% that weren't at a place that they should be. And we all know politically we can't screen out 50% of applications, but truly we are realizing that applicants are submitting applications before they are ready because there is a political pressure due to what the application cap is right now currently. So for larger localities, it's 10, smaller, it's 5. And there is a pressure to make sure that you meet those caps. And we are seeing that in the data. And then we're also seeing that we're submitting things that aren't ready just to get it into the process and have a chance and see what it looks like and what the results look like. And then in the worst case scenario, unready projects are getting funded that aren't necessarily at a place that you could really have a good cost estimate. So those are some of the things that we're seeing when we're looking at these applications being ready for the program. So our recommended solution here was to reduce the application cap limit to 2 and 5 from 4 and 10. Streamline the smart portal, and what I mean by that is we're calling it readiness gates. We're going to require sign-offs like we do for the state's understanding of project scope from our VDOT partners, our DRPT partners. We will need some emails from federal partners and from our central office staff and the OIP screening staff of a commitment of involvement in that applications process. So if you are doing an interchange project, at pre-application, we're going to require somebody from central office L&D to get into the application and say, yes, I have been involved in this. I cannot tell you how many times I picked up the phone and called a central office L&D engineer and they never seen an IAR or IMR that's attached to a smart scale application. So this is critically making sure the right folks are involved. And we're going to spend a long time doing some communications outreach on what this is going to look like. But that is what our intent is for next round and using the portal to do so. And that kind of backs up what I'm saying with screening out applications if they fail to meet the requirements. We also recognize a greater delivery issue that's happening with the applications. You know, we're not delivering the projects that are already in the streamline and not taking care of the projects that are already funded through Smart Scale and other programs. I know the administration has spent a long time talking about ways to improve delivery. So we hope to give information to the CTB members after we come out with the staff recommended scenario, showing them what the delivery outcomes are for each locality so they can use that information to determine if they should support certain applications moving forward. Small projects are more likely to get funded over large projects. What are small projects? We have determined that to be $10 million versus a larger project is anything over $10 million. So the smaller projects are funded 2 times more often than larger projects. There's a lot to unpack here. We obviously want to do value engineered versions of a project. If you can do an access management versus a grade separated situation, of course, we're always going to want that smaller version of our project versus a big project. But what we're really seeing here is that there's an exploitation of the HPP dollars in these smaller projects as well. So we know that there is a way to get smaller projects funded using HPP dollars if your MPOs and PDCs submit the projects. And what types of projects are being submitted under there isn't necessarily what we would consider projects of regional significance. Under the code, it states that projects of regional significance should be funded that are on regional networks and corridors of statewide significance. It does not specifically say what project type should be funded. We are adding that definition and redefining what HPP would be to help the board better guide on what they would consider a high priority project. So there's a lot of definitions with that, but a lot of it is centered around capacity. There is transit capacity and highway capacity tied into that as well, or interchange improvements. We also see reducing the number of applications can help with this as well. So if you have less application slots, the idea here is that you will be submitting your 3 phases together instead of submitting phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. That has been a common complaint against the CTB members, is that projects are being broken up and cut up into way too many small pieces, and it's not efficient for delivery. So that is the hope and intent, is that we get projects that are submitted together in groups. We all know that applicants act according to the rules that there are. So hopefully this is going to shift mentality in the future rounds. I will add one thing that is not listed here, which contributes to small projects being funded overwhelmingly, is our land use factor area. And I'm going to cover that on the next slide, but I do think that a number 3 should be land use, because if you're in a high dense area that gets a land use score typically, if you submit a project that's under $10 million, your chances of getting funded are exponentially greater than anything else, just by where it's located. So that would be another contributor to the small projects. And just as a review of all factor areas, if I'm going to say the word factor area, in smart scale, the 6 factor areas are safety, congestion, accessibility, land use, economic development, and environment. So those 6 benefits are divided by your total ask of cost in smart scale. On a district basis, lower scoring projects are not being funded over higher scoring projects. So in the surveys and in our CTB member discussions, there was concern that through the smart scale process, lower smart scale scores are getting funded at a greater rate than higher smart scale scores, and that kind of thing was being thrown around. And truly, on a district basis, you have your district grant pot, and you're going to get down to smaller smart scale scores in more rural districts, just because they have lower smart scale scores and you have to spend the district grant money in the district. So what we found is just that. On a district basis, yes, you do fund smaller scores in one district to another when you compare it, but on a statewide basis, that's a non-issue. We don't see that across the board. So the recommended solution here, though, is still to eliminate step 2 in conjunction with the HPP definition and refinement. Overall, there was a survey question about bias between urban and rural projects. There was a lot of discussion about this at the CTB meeting. I would recommend going back and looking, but there is no recommended solution here, because overall it was determined that there was no bias towards urban projects versus rural projects. They were funded at the same rate of their ask between urban and rural. Now, granted, urban always is going to ask for more than rural does. So that is a fact. But at that rate level, they are being funded on the same rate. Land use is driving a 1-factor majority in scoring. Land use factor drives total benefits at a rate of 2 times from round 1 to round 5. So this has been a growing problem. It's something we recognized in round 3 and 4, is that land use was starting to take over the other more empirical measures like safety and congestion. Safety and congestion really truly look at the change in benefit. If a project is there versus not there, what are the change in crashes that happen? What is the change in congestion? Land use just looks at where you are, how dense it is, how walkable it is to locations. And it's still important. It still means a lot. We want to build projects where they will have the most impact. No doubt about it. Absolutely an important thing. But the best way that we found to approach this is to modify the factor weighting for land use factor, making them multiplier for other factor areas. So if you have a score in one of the any other 5 factor areas, that score will be multiplied up if there is land use in that area. And I will just say most projects do get some sort of a land use score. So it will definitely still have an influence on the scoring overall. Lastly, benefit factors should be more forward-looking. We have spent some time talking about the congestion and economic development. I'm going to start with congestion. So the idea here is to calculate congestion benefits for 10 years in the future. This is something that we did for rounds 1 through 3. And then in 4 and 5, we went to looking at current day congestion. And that was a request, actually, I think, from Fredericksburg. And the administration at the time said, yeah, I guess we should solve problems that we have today instead of solving future problems. But realistically, when we're building these projects, you get your money in your 5th and 6th years. And by the time that it's built, it's 10 years out anyways. So it is kind of more of a current to look 10 years in the future. And then additionally, when we have folks study for improvements, we're having them look into the future to make sure the project's going to last. We're not building something to have it fail 2 years later. So it's just to meet somewhere in the middle of giving credit where credit is due for what we're asking someone to look in the future to build for. So that's our current recommendation for congestion. VEDP has taken the lead on the economic development portion. The ask there was to be more forward-looking with economic development. So ED1, I'm sure everyone is very familiar with in the room. It's our main economic development fact or measure that takes up 60% of the factor. It requires a lot of applicant development. We need a lot of information from the applicant. That is the one measure we rely on the applicant to complete in the application for us. They need to tell us what is coming from an economic development standpoint. If you have a Starbucks coming and you have signed plans, that's a detailed site plan that's signed. You get more credit for further along. It has always been a criticism that economic development is giving credit for things that are already in the pipeline. And really, it's not considering potential as much. We do have zoned only score. It's a very low amount of ED1. And then the other criticism is just how long it takes for staff to put it in and our staff to validate. Are these things really what the applicant says they are? And so I would say it takes probably 50 to 60% of the time involved in the process, and it's kind of unnecessarily burdensome. So VEDP has proposed a process that would not require applicant driven information. They have data sites that they're going to put out that are going to be public. One of them is the VScan site. And I think there probably is some familiarity in the room with that, as applicants do and localities do help feed the data in that. It's sites that have buildings that are available. It's sites that are available for development. There's a lot of information on that on our last month's CTB meeting. But their proposal would be to be more forward-looking on Virginia-centered economic development activity that's coming. And are they the biggest, most important things to Virginia? So that is where they're focused. Lastly, staff provided illustrative impacts of scenarios based on round 5 by district summary with project level detail provided. So this came out in September. What we did was look at every scenario. Scenario A is refining HPP definition. Scenario B is eliminating step 2. Scenario C is future congestion. Scenario D is land use as a multiplier. So we broke all those out individually so applicants and CTB members could see what the impact would be on an individual basis of how those scenarios are. You're not gonna be able to see much here. I can see everyone's kind of squinting. But all of this is available online. I can give a direct link for Hampton Roads because what you're looking at is Lynchburg. This isn't even Hampton Roads. And that's because if I put Hampton Roads up here, there's a lot more projects on it. I picked Lynchburg because they have fewer impacts to the scenario. But this is illustrative only. One of the questions that I was getting was, oh no, is my round 5 project getting dropped? Or, oh yes, is my round 5 project getting added? No. All projects are adopted. There is no changes happening to round 5 anymore. This is illustratively what would have happened if these rules were in place in round 5. The other caveat is they weren't acting to these rules. They weren't submitting projects that conform to these rules. So it's speculative at best to do this, but the desire is there to look into how the action would take place on projects if we were to do this in round 5. So if you do want to dig into this, that official round 5 scenario results does have whether or not it was funded and what program it was funded in the staff scenario. In these sheets, it only has projects that were touched by a scenario of added or dropped. If that project was funded in round 5 and it had no impact on any scenario, it stayed funded, it did not make this list. If it was not funded and had no impact in any scenario, it also did not make the list. So keep that in mind as you're looking through this and reviewing it for your own use. I also thought it was helpful in the lower left corner, which is absolutely micro tiny right now, CTB member consensus decisions. So you could see if the natural decisions of projects that were important to that CTB member or the locality did make it into the list or not, adds and drops that they had. Also, scenario E, that's the last thing, is that's the combination of every single one of those recommendations put together. So you can see the cumulative effect. We also have, before I go on, the rank changes that happened in scenario C and D. In A and B, they're funding decisions. So you do not change your smart scale score with funding decisions. In C and D, you're actually changing the methodology. So therefore, you're changing the smart scale score. So you can tell if it's a positive or negative impact. In the land use as a multiplier, if there's a big negative number, like on this screen right here, there's a negative 259, the second one from the bottom, that means that project was completely funded just by the land use factor and that it had no other benefits to provide. So moving forward, there would need to be some safety and congestion score or economic development accessibility, any one of the 5 factor areas could float the project. So there's one more briefing to the board in October to present the final staff recommendations before the board acts in December. That's 2 weeks from now, a week and a half. We'll be making another presentation. I did put on here some of public outreach events. I was at VTCA yesterday and I'm obviously here today. And the briefing will happen in a week and a half. And then we do plan on having a virtual public town hall. That will be a presentation similar to this, but it will include some of the economic development results, and we'll talk through the final recommendations based on feedback that we've gotten from the board members. There will be an opportunity to provide public comment. We will not be addressing questions in live scenario at the virtual public town hall, but we will be accepting questions ahead of time and providing frequently asked questions, responses to the frequently asked questions. In November, there's no CTB briefing planned, but the secretary has been clear if we need to have one, we will. So TBD on whether or not we will meet again with the board. And then in December, that is when the board will take action, and we hope to release the technical guide fairly shortly after that, depending on if all of the proposed changes get implemented, or we'll have to pivot pretty quickly on our technical guide if these proposed changes don't occur. And then in March of 2024, we will be opening the round 6 pre-application. So it's 6 months away from now, I think 5 actually. So that's just around the corner. If you are looking for a place to provide comment, I would say, like I just mentioned, the virtual town hall. You can also provide a letter. You can email it to me directly or to the secretary's office. There is a form you can go to at Smart Portal. Actually, at the Smart Scale website, we have a contact us, and you can provide comment there. You can email smartportal@ctb.virginia.gov. Please do provide comment. It's highly encouraged. We are reading them. The secretary did request that all letters and emails, official emails, get posted to the Smart Scale website underneath the process review landing page. So it will be made public just for your awareness. And we are in the process of posting all those to the website for everybody to review for consumption with the process review. That is all I have today. I'm sure I will be getting questions. Or am I supposed to be taking questions? Yes. So any questions?
Thank you for the presentation. Going to assume that there's questions as soon as everyone's had a chance to digest it.
Madam Chair, I did have a question.
Hold on just a second. Were there any questions from the localities first? I was going to say, we don't normally take questions from the audience. Are there any questions from the localities at the table? Okay, can you stand up and introduce your name and?
Yeah, I'm Travis West, City of Oregon. By changing the funding formula, especially the disconnection of land use and the increase in the weight of congestion relief, not just currently but in the future, would that have the potential to incentivize sprawl?
This is not to completely destroy the land use measure. It's to incentivize location and impact. So that is a TBD on, I will just leave it at that. This is not to disincentivize having projects in non-dense areas. If you are if you are the top land use score, you will get to double your other benefits that you have. It's to incentivize projects that are changing empirically measured benefits. That's the intention here. And I will separate that it is not a funding formula change. On a funding side, we've got district grant and HPP. So I really want to separate those two words. So funding formula is completely different than what we would say smart scale methodology is. So two different things. Our steps and eligibility for those programs are different from the smart scale score. And we do keep them separate in that way. IID does run the funding scenarios and we run the smart scale scores, and they're two completely different processes.
Not sure from the applicant side how completely separate they are, but moving on, there's a question back here.
Hi, Brooke, Sam Belfield, HRTPO staff. Thanks for that update and presentation. Just in regards to, for our military transportation networks and roadways that are important to serving our military. I sit on a committee, the Transportation Research Board, that meets each January, and we have a number of committee members from the Department of Defense, as well as Federal Highway, DOTs, MPOs across the nation. And one of the things that got brought up is the Strategic Highway Network, STRAWNet, which is the minimum defense highway network that serves many of our military installations sites across the U.S. And one of their concerns is that they also have STRAWNet connectors into those installation sites within the state of Virginia and throughout the United States, as well as power projection platform routes they have designated that are important to them. The reason I bring this up is that the DoD specifically brought up that many MPOs and states do not incorporate or consider these important routes to the military as a part of their prioritization processes. And so in Hampton Roads, we have incorporated those into our prioritization process, and I told them that I would bring this to our state representative in the SMART scale. So I did submit that as a response to the survey, but I just wanted to know if that was under consideration.
I will get back to you with that information.
My turn? Okay. Yeah, thanks again, Brooke. That was a very good presentation, very illuminating. I appreciate it. At the HRTPO, myself along with Keith Nichols and others on staff, we put together the Smart Scale application for our organization. And you mentioned in a previous slide that 50% of the applications, even after the August timeline, are still not ready or in that not ready status. And I guess for our benefit, what are some of the reasons, or the primary reason really, for a project to be in the not ready status? Thanks.
So I mentioned that coordination, the proper coordination isn't happening. I think there's also an enabling back to the culture of round one. When Smart Scale was released, it was, you will not need a consultant to develop an application. And there is a lot of heartache and heartburn within our VDOT staff to make sure that we're assisting and helping our applicants get these applications to where they need to be considered ready to get a proper cost estimate. And that just takes time that we don't have. We have proven time and time again that we don't have. at the expense of scoring these properly, because it's as basic as not even knowing what you want to do when you make your application. I mean, that happens probably, you know, a fifth of the time, that we're not even sure what the scope of the project should be. So how can you estimate? I mean, that's one example. Another is doing really big projects and being in a really big city and not thinking that you need to coordinate with other with the with other people at central office at VDOT, because you're typically not used to doing it. And this is not a picking on anybody. This is common things that I see. Common things with the right VDOT staff being involved. Has environmental seen it when it's a bigger project? It's just the fact that coordination of what you're even thinking about submitting doesn't happen with the VDOT staff, and they're the ones that are helping you actually put the application together. And it's a pull and a tug between that culture that came out in round one and the fact that we need to fully fund these projects. And then once we get to the point that central office has to validate a tier two estimate, and tier two is over 10 million, they have a panic that we're going to have to own that estimate. And so it's a balance of time. It's a balance of the political that I mentioned, that I think there's a cap limit thing that politically a board feels like they need to fill every cap. And when I speak to staff members at localities, they are overwhelmingly supportive of reducing the application numbers, while their boards are overwhelmingly against it, because of how long it takes to develop these things and where we're at. So I could speak on this for hours. I will not, but that's my top reasons.
Thank you.
Were there any other comments at the table?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Robert Lewis, City of Suffolk. I've spent quite a few hours going through the information that's been presented to the CTB and trying to understand it. And I've been here since the beginning, way before the beginning. I'll just tell you, it's unfortunately, this is just another process very similar to most everything VDOT is bringing to us today. Rather than truly addressing the issues or addressing the individuals who are not following the rules and doing the things, we penalize everybody. You have organizations out there that have been very efficient in using their numbers of applications and getting quite a few of those funded. You got others that have just been throwing things into the hopper, and rather than deal with the ones that are just throwing things in, we're going to penalize everybody. It kind of reminds me of the old saying, hey, I'm here from the government, I'm here to help. We're not getting better, we're getting more complicated. We're actually going back to where we started, we tried to get away from with the smart scale process. We're getting more bureaucratic, we're getting way more complicated, we're spending way more money trying to put an application together than where we started. And I do appreciate what you're doing, but I just had to make those comments. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, and I think I would just like to point out too, having put in applications since round one and having had projects funded since round one, and seeing some of the changes that were happening and some of the challenges that came with round one and some of the challenges that have come with the further rounds, and having had projects that were funded in smart scale that were VDOT administered in our locality versus locally administered in our locality, and how the program has developed, I feel like VDOT is trying to overcome their lack of resources by pushing a lot of these issues onto the localities. For example, there's several months of pre-application in this, but the requirements of submittal at pre-application are so minimal that I don't know what is happening during the pre-application period. And everything in the pre-application period can change with the final application. So again, what is happening in the pre-application period from a resources perspective? The other thing is coordination with VDOT staff prior to submitting an application. Well, part of the problem is VDOT staff's not available for everyone for every application. So people are using private consultants, and then VDOT wants to recreate the wheel every time somebody submits something that they didn't create. But it's being done by somebody else because VDOT doesn't have the resources to create it. So I feel like we're duplicating efforts over and over and over again instead of creating efficiencies. But I guess these are just comments. I'm not really sure that they're helpful to the process at this point.
If I could just chime in real quick. I mean, I know we've learned a lot of lessons from round one all the way through round five. I know we're spending a lot more time in rounds 4 and 5. We've spent a lot more time looking at applications, working with the localities on the pre-application to make sure we had better pre-applications or even to getting to the final application period. I think with each round, we've learned a lot more. We're spending a lot more time. I have to say for this region, I think localities and all, you guys do a good job. I think, Jerry, correct me if I'm wrong, if a locality were to submit all applications that they currently can apply for right now, including the transit agencies, MPO, et cetera, I think we could get over 130 something applications. But the region does a good job at saying, no, we're gonna submit the right applications. Typically, we get in the 50s are what's are submitted in the final app. So, I mean, I think the region does a good job at kind of self-policing the applications that are actually submitted to make sure they're good ones. So, I mean, I think the region does a good job. I mean, there's always room for improvement. I know we depend a lot on our consultant resources. We work closely with you all and your staff. And again, I think each round we're getting better. Yes, we're spending more time, at the application period than we have in the past, but I think we are getting, a better product at the end of the day. We're still dealing with some of the estimates on round 2 and round 3, even some round 1 that we're trying to, we learned a lot from those rounds and we're actually doing a better job, I think, collectively on what's being submitted for a final application. So, with the changes that are being proposed now into round 6, I do think that's going to make the process better. Again, and reducing the number of applications, I don't think is going to, hurt this region as a whole, just based on the number of applications that are currently being submitted. But some of these other changes, we'll have to work through. And as Brooke said, if you have comments or suggestions, please, be sure to share that, between now and in the CTB meeting in October.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Jackson. And I just say it's great to have this process instead of, the old way that things were done. I think,
Yeah.
it's not perfect. It never will be, but it's a great process and it's very difficult from, around the table and from the VDOT side. It's a difficult thing to do. So I commend you for that. You showed the Lynchburg projects and you said they were Hampton Roads projects. How do we get to those?
Go to the CTB website and go to the meetings tab.
The links,
ctb.virginia.org.
right? And then
Brooke,
the
I
link.
can provide that to TPO to include in the meeting minutes.
Yeah. And just for those in the room, you can go to the meetings and agendas and there's a PDF under the September meeting, September 20th.
Okay.
And it's Smart Scale Process Review Update. There's an update one that is there.
Anyway, now those projects by district, are they just the successful projects or all the submitted projects?
So the projects that are shown on the list
Mhm.
are only if they had an impact from like a change from round 5, the staff scenario. So as you can see on the darker shaded dropped and the green shaded
Yeah.
added,
Yeah, yeah.
that is a change that
Right.
happened in any given scenario.
Gotcha.
So it
But
was
that
only
list, is
reported.
that projects, all the projects that were submitted or all the projects that were successfully funded?
It was if they were either successfully funded or unfortunately dropped. They made this list. Yeah, in the recommended scenario. So instead of listing every single project
No,
in
I-
Hampton Roads, so say you had 50 applied for, literally all we put in the list is if there was an add drop in any single one of these columns. So if there was a add or a drop from the original round 5 staff scenario in any scenario, then it made this list that got published.
Did you run the scenarios on all the projects?
Yes.
They ran it on all and just published a list of the changes.
Every submitted project. So if it was funded in the round 5 staff scenario and it stayed funded in any scenario we ran, we didn't put it on this list. If it wasn't funded, in the round 5 staff scenario, and it stayed unfunded in every scenario not on this list.
So the drop in the green and the red is not just a change in score, it's a change in status or would be change in status.
Yes, illustrative only.
Right.
I mean, if you ran all of the projects, could you just publish the results of all of the projects in the scenarios?
It was a decision to post it like this. We could, yes, or somebody could put that spreadsheet together, but it is not created right now.
If there weren't any other questions, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for having me.
Item 14 is a presentation from HRT. We're going to go ahead and go through that presentation as well.
Do I do it? Is someone going to bring up the presentation? Okay. Oh, that's okay. I've done it enough. I could. I can pantomime it. Mime it. Perfect. Thank you. So good morning. I'm Ray Amoruso. I'm with Hampton Roads Transit, and we're going to be co-presenting. This is Amy Brazel, Director of Contracted Services for Hampton Roads Transit. I'll start off and turn it over to Amy, and then I'll wrap it up. We recently had the opportunity to brief the Regional Transit Advisory Panel, RTAP, a month ago, I guess, and we were invited by Bob Crum and Pavithra to come and address TTAC on our microtransit pilot, and that's why we're here today. If I can advance the slide. There we go. Seems like ancient history now, but we were awarded a state demonstration grant from VDRPT, just shy of 1.6 million at the start of the pandemic, to do a demonstration project for demand responsive service. The two partners with HRT was the City of Newport News and the City of Virginia Beach, which each city provided a 20% share of the local match to the demonstration grant. The demonstration grant had specific goals that we wanted to demonstrate. Specifically, does microtransit improve mobility options for communities in a cost-effective manner? Is there a role for the mode called demand responsive service, which we locally call microtransit, in the HRT service district? And then the state, VDRPT, was interested, can what we learned through the pilot project translate into benefits and experience for other transit properties throughout the Commonwealth, as we were one of the first to try microtransit. The timing of the award of the grant, while we were excited, was unfortunate because it hit right before the pandemic. So we had to delay the actual implementation. I can't, oh, there it is. We had to delay the implementation, and I'll talk about that a little bit, because at the time, at the peak of the pandemic, I don't think anyone wanted to climb into a small passenger van with strangers to share a ride to their destination. So we waited until we were pretty much out of the pandemic. But the objective was to use an app-based booking system to reserve rides, to move people around in two predefined zones in a shared ride mode utilizing passenger vans. The two zones for the pilot projects were picked for very specific reasons. There was one in Virginia Beach and one in Newport News. And because the agency did not have its own passenger vehicles or non-CDL commercial driver license operators, we chose to do the demonstration program through what we call turnkey project, which basically is we released a request for proposal out onto the street for someone to come in that had the cloud-based technology, the vehicles and the operators, the capabilities to deploy the system over the 6 months. The zones, and before I get about the evolving marketplace, had two hypotheses centered around them that we were testing. In Newport News, we had a community west of Warwick Boulevard that stretched pretty much from roughly Christopher Newport University up to Patrick Henry Mall that had no fixed route service because as those residential communities were developed in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, they were cul-de-sac communities, irregular street pattern, no curb and gutter, basically not conducive to fixed route service. And we wanted to know, the hypothesis was there a latent demand for some type of transit service that would connect people in those residential communities to the two primary trunk services that existed on Warwick Boulevard and Jefferson Avenue. Virginia Beach's hypothesis was a different one that we were testing. We had the zone was centered around Independence Boulevard, roughly from Pleasure House Road down to Virginia Beach Boulevard, bounded by the town center area, and then to the west to a connection point either to the end of line of light rail or the Janif Transfer Center in the Military Circle Mall area. That hypothesis was that we had an underperforming route serving the Bayside community, the Haygood Market Shopping Center, Bayside High School, and the Bayside Rec Center that's been underperforming in terms of the number of people it carried for the hourly service. Can demand responsive service replace fixed route service and do it more cost effectively than the cost of running a 40-foot bus 12 hours a day, once an hour? Because primarily, if you look at the data, it was only carrying about 4 or 5 passengers per trip, and that's a lot of financial resources to carry some people on transit. Why microtransit? This is a question that a lot of transit agencies are facing nationwide. The marketplace in transit is changing. If anything, the pandemic exacerbated the situation and brought to light the fact that people discovered that they can work effectively from home. The tools and technologies are such, at least in my lifetime in this profession, are incredibly different than when I first started out in 1981, and that you actually can work from home, be trusted by your employer to do meaningful work, pass large documents back and forth electronically without having to report to the office every day from 9 to 5 days a week, or maybe even later, working later. Agencies need to learn, transit agencies like HRT need to learn that the public, people who use transit, expect a different model than just fixed route service. A model that when they need it, it's available, not so much on a fixed route schedule based on an hourly service, but when they need it, and they like to reserve those rides through the cell phone, through an app-based system in which they go to a virtual bus stop, maybe meet one or two other of their fellow citizens and share a ride to a common destination point where fixed route service like the Route 20 and Virginia Beach Boulevard, like light rail, can take them to their final journey destination if they choose to use transit. So HRT wanted to test all of those hypotheses, and VDRPT was very excited to learn more about the potential for microtransit. I'm going to turn it over to Amy, and she managed the contractor, so she's going to walk through the performance factors and the lessons learned, and then I'll come back up at the end.
All right, good morning. As already mentioned, Amy Brizz, I'm the Director of Contracted Services and Operational Analytics with HRT. And I was the project manager for this project. I'm going to share some information about the project and some of the data that we gathered from the project and talk about some of the lessons learned. So we did use a contractor. As already mentioned, it was turnkey. We used VIA to operate our service. We used minivans to transport, and you'll see a picture of those in just a second. The trip requests were from customers. They were done through an app. They did have an opportunity to call in. We had one person use the phone one time throughout the course of this project, and the trips were shared with other customers who had similar destinations. And if I can switch to the next slide, I'll actually talk about this a little bit more. Thank you. So as I mentioned, they were paired with other riders that were going along the same path. They matched them with the best vehicle that shared the journey in that same destination, and it directed riders to a virtual bus stop. This was not a door-to-door service. This was a virtual stop to a virtual stop. So the Newport News Zone, it was 20 square miles. We identified several points of interest with the city of Newport News. A few of them: Patrick Henry Mall, Christopher Newport University, the Denby Community Service, and the airport. Just to touch on the airport, that was something that wasn't originally in the scope. We did want to test that out to see if people were going to use it to transfer to the airport. We had very little ridership that actually touched the airport. So it had connections to 6 of our bus routes. And one of the unintended positive consequences of this service, the community paramedicine program ended up using the service. So they had a number of people who use the 911 service to take a ride to the hospital, whether it be for shelter or a meal. So they were able to use these services to send them to other services or places that could better help them instead of going to the hospital through 911. So some of the most popular destinations in Newport News was the Walmart, Patrick Henry Mall, which had the connections to our bus service, Minchville High School, Beachmont Drive, and Winter Haven Drive. Both of those were apartment communities. Virginia Beach routes, 15 square miles. Some of their points of interest were the Walmart grocery store, Virginia Wesleyan College, which is in Norfolk, and also the Tide Light Rail Station was also, it wasn't identified, but you'll see in just a moment that that was our biggest destination for people in Virginia Beach. This particular service had connections to 7 of our bus routes and that Tide end of line. Next slide, please. Thank you. The most popular destinations, as I mentioned, Newtown Light Rail Station, the Walmart Shopping Center, the Garnet Point Apartments and Townhomes, and the Town Center area were the most popular there in Virginia Beach. Next slide, please. Thank you. So our service launched on July 10th. This was a 6-month pilot. However, we ended up extending for 1 more month because we had the available funding. The service was very, very popular, especially in Newport News. It was very well received. So we were able to extend it an additional 30 days. So you'll see the data shows a little bit of February. It ran Monday through Friday, 5 a.m. to 9 p.m., Saturday and Sunday, 7 to 8. Our fleet size was 6 vehicles in Virginia Beach. 2 of those were wheelchair accessible vehicles, 5 in Newport News, and 9 spares. However, we did end up moving some of the vehicles up to Newport News because it was so successful up there. We had to move some of the vehicles to accommodate those riders. The results. Here's our data. So the blue is Virginia Beach and the orange is Newport News. As you can see, Newport News had quite a bit more ridership than Virginia Beach did. You can see that month over month, the ridership continued to grow. And you see that little part in February, we did have good ridership. Just those first 8 days is reflected to the right there. Next slide. The total service, we had just over 33,000 rides. So this is our passengers by day. As you can see, Monday through Friday were the highest days. This is showing your commuters, those going to work, those going to school. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. Again, this is the one that's showing our passengers by hour. You can see between the 7 and 8 and the 4 and 5, you're again seeing your commuters, those going to school, those going to work. So it was definitely used by that particular demographic. Next slide. So towards the end of the pilot, we did a survey. 60% and 40%. So 60% of our Virginia Beach respondents and 40% of the Newport News respondents stated that they were going from work to home on their journey. 50% of the Virginia Beach passengers and 40% of the Newport News passengers connected with other HRT services. Just over 25% of the respondents, more than any other category, said that they would be forced to take a taxi or another rideshare type program like Uber or Lyft if they did not have microtransit. And one other interesting statistic, in Newport News, 90% of those that responded either had one or no vehicles in their home that use this service. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So our lessons learned. 6 months was not long enough to get the data we needed. It did not give the ridership enough time to mature. The fleet size, we feel like we were good there. We didn't have to add any additional vehicles, so we're pretty sure that the number. However, the wave vehicles, we do feel like we could increase those just a little bit. We did see a lot of the ridership, especially in Newport News, going to medical appointments. So we think we can increase the wave vehicles. The fares, we did match the HRT bus fares. So we think that that was the appropriate. The zone demand in zone was less than of the out of zone destinations. We did see people that were leaving the area, getting on light rail or getting on a bus to leave. We will consider modifying the zones. The higher passenger productivity occurs if you match the passenger destinations to the travel generators. And the turnkey service that we did may not be the most cost effective, and Ray's going to mention that here in just a second on the next slide.
Thank you, Amy. So going back to hypothesis that we had posed, certainly there was a latent demand in Newport News of this east-west travel pattern, leaving the residential areas and connecting to the two heavy retail and industrial corridor, light industrial corridors on Jefferson and Warwick Boulevard. Looking at the individual trip journeys, school, shopping, retail, going to work. There's a lot of employers along those two long linear corridors on the peninsula. So certainly there was definitely a demand for some type of transit service. That was a good lesson learned. And think about it, when we implemented it in July, we really went into our slower ridership months in December, November, December, and January, the holiday seasons, which is why we want to do another 12-month pilot. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And in Virginia Beach, the zone up Independence Boulevard, north of Virginia Beach Boulevard, there is a strong performer in the Route 1 that goes to Pembroke coming out of Norfolk. But it's a diverse zone with a lot of mixed use, land use, residential. There is some transit demand. What we found is that they don't stay in the zone. They want to connect to go elsewhere in the region. I suspect it's mostly for work reasons. So that's why you see, I find a little irony in Virginia Beach citizens wanting to use light rail. I always find that ironic for my friends in Virginia Beach, but they have destinations obviously in downtown Norfolk or elsewhere. So we did prepare late last year a request for proposals for a trip because it's an eligible activity under the TRIP program. And we were gracious, we were thankful that we were awarded another round of funding through the state system for 12 months in the same two zones. And very grateful to our partners that they agreed again to provide the local match as the TRIP grant requires. One of the things we want to look more closely at, and there's an internal study at HRT undergoing right now, is that we believe turnkey operations may be a very expensive way to deliver the service. We didn't have the resources, but we're looking at what can we do from everything from bringing it fully within house or to fully giving it to someone else to run, or hybrid. So we're doing an internal study to see what HRT could do best. Is that develop an army of non-CDL operators, maybe purchase a small fleet of these passenger vans instead of having someone bear the cost of leasing them and maintaining them. And that study is underway now and it's going to be completed within the next 45 to 60 days. with some recommendations. The pilot, we anticipate releasing a request for proposal, again, for turnkey for the next 12 months. Amy, in the next month. And once the board awards a contract, there's a little ramp-up time, especially communicating with both the chamber and again, in these zones and residents about this opportunity for microtransit will be available again for 12 months. Is there another slide? I can't remember.
Yes.
There's one more slide. So no, that was it. So I guess it was just a
I
question.
did that on
So,
purpose.
I think microtransit has a place in the universe of all the HRT services. Of course, we have fixed route service. We have the new 757 Express regional backbone service with 15-minute frequencies. We have light rail. We have ferry service. We have paratransit service. And yes, the base express on the Navy base via a different type of grant. So I think in the family of services, demand responsive will have its place in our 10-year transit strategic plan. We've identified other zones in partnership with our 6 municipal partners that are either a transit desert, I call it, or have a density that's less supportive of fixed route service, or has future growth that's coming. I look to my friends in Chesapeake all the time because that city is literally changing overnight. Every time I open my eyes in the morning and drive down Bobo Parkway, oh, what's this new thing coming here? But there's opportunity that doesn't always have to depend on fixed route service. And there is a final report for the 6-month pilot, and there'll be another report after the 12 months. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, and both of us would.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, thank you both for the presentation. I know we've talked about potential to roll out pilot programs in other localities. Is the intent to finish, I guess, the 12-month pilot now in Virginia Beach and Newport News, or just can you speak generally in terms of potentially rolling this out to other localities?
Sure. Thanks, Troy. It's a great question. So the 10-year transit strategic plan does have an appendix D, which is a microtransit appendix that actually identifies some other potential zones that we're interested in. Once we finish the internal study in terms of service delivery method, which will help direct which is the best way to cost effectively deploy this, Mr. Harrell is very interested in rolling out a couple of more zones. You have one south of Great Bridge Bridge in that community, but we've identified zones in Portsmouth and Norfolk, another one in Virginia Beach by Salem Crossing, and there are some in Hampton as well. There are others that we'll be looking at in next year's update of the transit strategic plan. So Mr. Harrell is very anxious for us to roll out more, so it will be somewhere in our next year's service plan. There'll be at least 1 or 2 more rolling out.
Were there any other questions? I did have one as well. How did you get do the public outreach to get it out to people and also to kind of keep them informed that it would be a short-term program?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah. We did a huge marketing push, both via and our partners with the city of Hampton and the city of Virginia Beach. We worked with their internal staff. It was pushed out via media. It was social media. There was posters, you name it. There was a huge push. And on every single piece of material that did go out, it did say that, 6 months, 6 months, 6 months. And about 45 days before the service ended, they started sending out text messages reminding people that it would be ending. So big media push for all of that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I don't think there's any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Item 15 is a VDOT presentation on the air terminal interchange.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Sam Baseka, Major Projects Design Section Manager. I'm here with Frank. We'll start the presentation. I'll start it and he will run the rest of it. Next slide, please. Okay, so what we will be talking about today is we're gonna go over a graphical overview of the project and go over the scope of the project, stakeholders, schedules, and estimates like progress and risk. So yeah, the ATI project is two independent projects, which is the western and the eastern. The goal of the projects were to provide like intersection, like improvements at the exit of the like at the exit to Public Connector Road, which is the western intersection. What the project is doing is basically turning the current like exit ramp to Public Connector into an intersection and widen the Public Connector Road like into a two-way traffic system all the way to CB Road. And that intersection will be at grade. And the next project is the eastern intersection. That intersection does not exist right now. What the project will be doing is we will be adding a new intersection at the intermodal connector to connect to the Ingersoll Avenue. That project will add a new bridge over the railroad and also provide like improvement on Ingersoll Road all the way to gates 10 of that project. So I'll with that, that's the general overview of the scope of what the project will accomplish. I'll pass it over to Frank to go over the details. Frank is the project manager who's overseeing the design for the project.
That's great. And can you guys make sure to speak into the mic so we can hear you all the way across the room? Thank you.
Got it. Okay. All right. In case you're not too familiar with this, this is all on Naval Station Norfolk. So to the gentleman that made the comment during the Smart Scale presentation of getting funds for Department of Defense agencies, the U.S. Navy, to help input transportation facilities, this hits the nail right on the head on that. So. Okay, to expand out on the western intersection, it's an at-grade intersection with a heavily traffic signaled controlled methodology for the intermodal connector as well as the public connector. Now, as mentioned, what we're going to do is we're going to expand the public connector from a single lane off ramp from the intermodal connector to a bidirectional system, which would allow vehicles coming out of Gate 5 and or even Hampton Boulevard to go down and connect into the intermodal connector. Now, this also supports the Virginia Port Authority and the city of Virginia Beach. The Port Authority has a northern gate that this supports access to and from, as well as taking a lot of vehicles off of Hampton Boulevard and Terminal Boulevard and putting them on here, which helps support the city of Norfolk. Now, the eastern intersection is a very complex project. It's grade separated, as mentioned before, where it spans over the intermodal connector eastbound lanes, as well as the rail lines that connect to the Port Authority. And after spanning the intermodal connector eastbound as well as the rail lines, will connect into currently the Ingersoll Road, which then connects all of the what's called Camp Allen area, where it has a lot of Naval Station Norfolk facilities there. Major stakeholders for this project are the United States Navy, the City of Norfolk, and the Virginia Port Authority. Now, the Virginia Port Authority owns the land where the rail tracks are and leases out the tracks to Norfolk Southern Railroad and Norfolk and Portsmouth Beltline. Now, here's our schedule and estimate for the project. The western intersection, we've completed the scoping. And for the eastern intersection, we anticipate the scoping to be completed by the end of November. The public hearing for both of these projects is tonight. Now, we plan on getting advertisement for the western intersection in August of 26 with a completed construction time point of September of 2029. Now, the eastern intersection is not fully funded yet, excuse me. And once this becomes fully funded, then we'll be able to develop the schedule to apply in there for the advertisement and the end of construction date. Now, where we are funded for the eastern intersection is development of the design. That is that $6.7 million figure. And based on the projection of when we believe we're going to get funding for it right away, and the construction phases will equate to over $109 million. The western intersection will come in at 24.5 million. And that western intersection is fully funded. It is also a priority item for Naval Station Norfolk. What we've been able to accomplish has been all the preliminary engineering activities, field survey, geotechnical data, and the level of design is now at the public hearing level. We've had initial concepts of at-grade layouts for both the western and eastern intersections. However, when we completed the traffic analysis, because of the impact with the railroad, the eastern intersection had to be advanced into a grade separated facility. We've concluded the PFI design as well as the value engineering. And as mentioned before, public hearing is tonight for both the eastern and the western intersections. Now, some of our risks that we can foresee, which we're going to take into consideration and resolve, we've learned a lot from recently constructing the intermodal connector, the subsurface soil conditions in this area. They're not that favorable. Also, if we have to relocate Navy-controlled utilities, that's an issue. That's a schedule risk, because it'll take them a lot of time to get that work under contract and have it moved, have those utilities moved. The U.S. government owns all of that property there. However, the United States Navy oversees it. And although we're not going to acquire and purchase any property, it will be transferred over to VDOT as an easement for us to be able to go in and construct it, as well as after construction to be able to maintain it. Now, the next three bullets are funding are only applicable to the eastern intersection. Again, we're waiting for the funding to be achieved. And as we cross over the rail lines and on our way to Ingersoll Ave, that huge area in there is an environmental Superfund site that the Navy dumped all of their stuff in during the World War II and the Vietnam War. So as we work in that area, it is a huge environmental concern. And also working with railroads, can be sometimes not easy. So with that, thank you so much for your time and the opportunity to inform you about these projects. And if you have any questions,
Were there any questions? I'm not seeing any questions.
okay. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
We do have
Greatly
one
appreciate
question. We do have one question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, Frank, thank you for that. Given the cost of the intermodal connector, I applaud you for the grade separation on the eastern intersection. But given that that intermodal connector provides free flow access for the northern port, I don't understand your conclusion that adding a signal to that helps the port.
It does because it allows them access.
But they've already got access, free flow access.
Well, not to Hampton Boulevard, not through their northern gate.
So, okay, so they
And
come out.
also, if for some reason Hampton Boulevard is congested heavily, they have the ability to go around and use that western intersection to get into their northern gate
From where?
from the intermodal connector.
No, but they already can get in from the intermodal connector. That's what I'm saying.
Mhm.
They have free flow. So what you're saying is that this would add more trucks to Hampton Boulevard.
Not according to our IAR.
But you just said that it provides the port the opportunity from the northern gate to use Hampton Boulevard, which they don't currently have. So then it would add more trucks. to
Well, they
Hampton
use
Boulevard.
intermodal connector to go around and get into the northern gate. So it's, and not Hampton Boulevard.
Well, that's what I understood. You just said that it does provide them now the ability to come out on the intermodal connector, to go up on this public connector and get to Hampton Boulevard and run the trucks down to Portsmouth, which they're doing from the southern part of the port already.
Unfortunately, this photo is just a focus on the intersection, and it doesn't really lay out where the northern gate is. But where the northern gate is, if for some reason the area in between, let's say, the intermodal connector and Terminal Boulevard is congested, trucks can get on the intermodal connector and they overspan Hampton Boulevard and get into the northern gate.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't mind, I interject here a little bit. The currently how the public connector road works is a one-way access. By making it a two-way access that allows for vehicles to come back from CV Road to come back to intermodal connector right now, that is not possible. It provides a reverse way of traffic to come back. Hopefully that helps clarify. I mean, what the project is doing mostly there is converting a single lane access, which only allows you to exit from the intermodal connector to go towards CB Road, to allow you to come back, like in the reverse direction, either eastbound or westbound, like on the intermodal connector. That is the main change that's happening with the western intersection.
Yes, right now, Hampton Boulevard can only be used for the southern part of the port. This allows the northern part of the port to use Hampton Boulevard, which will add trucks through ODU to the northern port. I just think it's important that that's known.
Well, according to our IAR, this helps connectivity from that northern gate of the northern port
Yeah.
to the intermodal connector
Right.
and eliminates them driving on Hampton Boulevard.
No, it allows more trucks to use Hampton Boulevard through Old Dominion. Because now they can get to the northern port,
Mhm.
whereas before they could only get to the
I,
southern.
I think I see where you're driving at now. It does lessen, the congestion,
Well,
which then would allow,
increases congestion on Hampton Boulevard. That's the point. But we don't need to argue that.
okay?
Were there any other questions on the presentation at this time? Thank you. And
All
I'm
right, thank you.
assuming that the presentation and slides will be made available on the website. So if anybody wants to follow up, that contact information will be there too.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to add that we can certainly, we've engaged with the city of Norfolk and with the port with questions that they've had and tried to address the concerns. And we can certainly make sure we circle back with TPO and answer any questions that you may have and kind of show what the traffic analysis shows to try to eliminate any concerns or questions. Move forward.
Thank you. So we're pretty close to wrapping up now. On the agenda, you'll see item 16 is the 3-month tentative schedule. While technically we didn't adopt the modified schedule, I would encourage everyone, if you're going to look at the schedule, to look at the one that's noted modified. 17 is for your information. There's a couple of reports in there. 18 is announcements, and I'll go ahead and ask the TPO if there were anything they wanted to specify under announcements.
Yeah. Over here, yeah. HRTO will be starting as quick as we can after this meeting. I know we have a quick sidebar afterward, but hopefully around 11:45 or so, we'll start HRTO. It'll be in the 757 room.
And old or new business?
Madam Chair, before you adjourn, just one last announcement. The nominating committee does need to meet very quickly.
You said 2 minutes earlier. And with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.